Before diving into the story, let's set the background. I took up a job at a precast concrete company during the transition from high school to college. Although the job was unpleasant, the pay made it worthwhile. Our main task involved manufacturing large storm culverts and tunnel pieces that were later installed on construction sites rather than being made on site. After a few weeks of working at the company, I was trained to operate the industrial concrete mixer, which became my daily responsibility. This mammoth machine stood 3 stories tall, capable of mixing up to 4.5 cubic yards of concrete at once. It was also the most battered equipment in the entire facility, which spoke volumes about its condition. Operating 6 days a week, 2 shifts a day, the mixer never received maintenance because the company couldn't find technicians willing to work on Sundays, its only non-operational day. Consequently, the machine was in dire need of servicing. The only positive aspect was the automated weighing and feeding system for the materials. All it took was a push of a button to initiate the process. The most common issue we faced was the inadequate sealing of the bottom release door. The door would be slightly ajar, causing all the water to leak out and leaving us with a useless, lumpy mess that had to be discarded in a scrap hole. If this occurred, we had to swiftly empty the mixer before the concrete started to harden inside. Thankfully, this happened only once during my time there, but it took an entire shift to chisel away the hardened material. To avoid such incidents, we made a mark on the sliding door to indicate the correct position for sealing. Now, let's explain the manufacturing process. We began by constructing a cage made of rebar and anchor points on a base surrounding a core. A form was then bolted around it. After the quality assurance, QA, personnel approved the structure, we filled the form with concrete and left it to cure. The curing time varied depending on the ambient temperature, with higher temperatures resulting in faster curing. Once the piece reached the appropriate level of hardness, it was lifted off the core using a crane. This process was repeated until the required number of pieces was produced. Another noteworthy aspect was the color-coded hard hats. Each roll had a specific color assigned to it. For instance, blue denoted plant supervisors, green represented quality assurance personnel, and red indicated the foreman. For regular workers, there were 2 color options: yellow for those who were inexperienced or less skilled, typically newcomers or less capable individuals, and gray for those who were proficient. About 5 months into my tenure, I had earned a gray hard hat, signifying my competence. Now, on to the story itself. Our plant was falling behind the production rate of another facility owned by the company. In an attempt to catch up, we were working 10 to 12 hours every day. Usually, multiple pieces were manufactured per form per day, 2 to 4, however. In our plant, we were struggling to produce even 1 or maybe 2 pieces per form per day. To identify the cause of this issue, the company's owner decided to send an executive from the main office to observe and time each section of our manufacturing process. This decision seemed rather foolish, considering the critical role temperature played in concrete curing. Our plant was located in an unheated warehouse in a state bordering Canada, while the other plant enjoyed the warm climate of Florida. It should come as no surprise that our production was slower. Before the executive's arrival, during the shift meeting, our foreman explicitly instructed us to follow the executive's directions but otherwise keep our distance from him. Quite an unusual instruction, to say the least. The shift proceeded as usual, with us constructing cages and bolting forms. Around 6 hours into the shift, I climbed up to the platform on top of the mixer and was greeted by the executive, who was wearing the shiniest white hard hat I had ever seen. He was also clad in office attire, including black dress shoes. It was an odd sight to witness in a concrete plant, and he appeared utterly bored. He asked me if I was looking forward to the end of the shift in 2 hours or so. I replied that, assuming no issues arose, we might be able to leave in about 4 hours. The executive's face dropped, and he mumbled something that I couldn't quite catch. While performing the pre-checks on the mixer, I noticed that the bottom door was once again not closing properly. I shouted down to the plant supervisor, informing him about the door's faulty seal and explaining that the machine would be out of commission until I fixed it. Typically, this involved chipping away the concrete residue left by the previous shift, ensuring the door closed properly. In response to my announcement, the plant supervisor hurled a few choice words towards the mixer, then stormed off into his office. The executive inspected the door and claimed it looked fine. I insisted that it frequently failed to seal and pointed out the mark indicating the correct position. I went to fetch the necessary tool, a braking bar welded onto a rebar shaft, which I kept underneath the mixer. Instead of going through the hassle of finding an air gun and going through confined space lock and tag-outs, I could now simply stand on top and chip away at the concrete until the door moved freely. Upon returning with the tool, the executive told me that the seal was fine and instructed me to run it. I reiterated my concerns about the door's sealing issues, asking if they were certain about proceeding. They replied affirmatively, so I started up the mixer. As expected, the mixer released a cloud of silica into the air. With the water draining out from the bottom, the dust situation was about to worsen. I offered the executive an extra mask I had, but they assured me they would be fine. Well, it was their lungs, not mine. Simultaneously, I noticed the plant's heavy equipment operator entering the building. I caught their attention and signaled for them to bring the front loader. They gave me a perplexed expression and silently mouthed, "Why?" I pointed at the mixer, repeated the gesture, and they threw their hands up in resignation before turning away. The front loader arrived just in time to prevent the mess from partially hardening inside the mixer. Consequently, the cleanup became a simple process of dumping the concrete into the loader's bucket, then transferring it to the scrap hole and rinsing out the mixer. Once the immediate mess was dealt with, we resumed the shift after I had chipped away the concrete and fixed the door, enabling it to seal properly once again. We didn't waste much time, perhaps only an hour. When the foreman inquired about what had happened later during the shift, he couldn't contain his laughter for the rest of the day. The plant supervisor approached me afterwards asking for an explanation of what had occurred. He reassured me that he didn't hold me accountable for that dumb jerk's mistakes, since the executive had explicitly instructed us to follow his directions. As for what transpired in the parking lot, the plant supervisor never disclosed any details. I can only speculate that it resulted in angry phone calls and a significant waste of concrete. I reside in a modest second-floor apartment along with my 2 teenagers and our beloved feline companions. Beneath us, there resides an elderly couple, both over the age of 75. Unfortunately, our apartment complex lacks proper maintenance and insulation, resulting in an audible transfer of sounds between units. Consequently, we can hear their television, conversations, arguments, and even the cries of their occasionally unruly 6-year-old grandson. Every time they open or close their door, it echoes throughout the building. Evidently, this elderly couple has taken it upon themselves to continuously complain to our landlord about what they perceive as excessive noise coming from our unit. They persistently bang on their ceiling whenever we accidentally drop something, close a door that tends to stick, or even when I simply get up at night. On one occasion, the woman shouted through the heating vent at me when I accidentally knocked my water glass off the bedside table. They also raised their voices when we climbed the stairs, going as far as expressing grievances about our water usage during showers, which is entirely unrelated to them. While it is true that our cats occasionally engage in playful running around, we make an effort to keep them entertained, take them for walks, and they generally exhibit the calmness expected of middle-aged feline. We do not indulge in blaring televisions, as the kids listen to their music with headphones, and we are not the type to engage in boisterous activities or host parties. The breaking point occurred recently when my son was preparing food late at night around 10:30 p.m. and one of the cats decided it was time for a playful sprint. This lasted merely 3 minutes before my son managed to catch the cat. In response, there came a loud banging on our ceiling. The cat then retreated to my daughter's room and promptly fell asleep. Suddenly, we heard the old man rushing up the stairs, banging on our door. Since I was already in bed and the cat had been put away, I chose not to answer. To my surprise, the situation escalated to the point where they decided to call the police and lodge a noise complaint against us, specifically targeting the cat and my son's use of the microwave. When the police arrived, they found our house dark. I was in my pajamas, and the cats were peacefully asleep in the bedroom. They questioned me, astounded, asking if I had been in bed, to which I confirmed. When they inquired about the reported disturbance, I explained that my son was simply preparing food and the cat had been momentarily playful. The police officers exchanged a look of disbelief and muttered, "What a waste of time." One of them even asked if I wanted to file a complaint for harassment. The following day, as I was parking my car, the old lady shouted across the parking area, proclaiming that they were entitled to silence whenever they desired and called me obnoxious and rude, threatening to have us evicted. Shortly after, the landlord contacted me, clearly agitated, relaying the incessant complaints from the elderly couple, emphasizing how our supposed noise was ruining their quality of life. In response, I calmly recounted the incidents they had complained about and expressed my intention to vacate the premises within 60 days. I also made it clear that if they persisted in their actions, I would have no choice but to file a harassment complaint. Surprisingly, the landlord responded with a nonchalant okay and seemed unperturbed by the situation. It is worth noting that the majority of their grievances revolved around ordinary daytime noises, with the occasional incident occurring after 10 p.m., albeit infrequently. However, the notion that they are entitled to complete silence at all times, particularly considering the subpar condition of the first-floor apartment, is quite amusing. I can only hope that the next residents who move in after I leave have lively young children who enjoy playing loud pop music and engaging in energetic exercise videos in the living room. It seems only fair in this neighborhood, where it appears that everyone is armed in one way or another. So this happened to me years ago, 1985. My mother worked for what was the first computer supply company in the USA in lovely Compton, California, gang capital of the world at the time. She had heard they needed an order puller and I got the job. I hated this job right away because for some reason after working hard for 8+ hours a day, I'd go to sleep and dream I was still working, so I always felt tired. Most of the guys I worked with were good guys. One was a former Mexican mafia gang member, Victor, who gave up that life and really turned his life around. One day, they hired Gino. He was an Italian-American but wanted to be a Mexican gang member more than anything. He latched onto Victor after finding out about his past and was always asking about the gang lifestyle, and he was hoping that Victor could help him get into the gang. Victor told him about his life, but refused to introduce him as he gave that up and didn't want to go back. Gino wasn't happy about this. One day, I started noticing Gino was finished working before all of us, and that for some reason, I was not finishing until way later than the others. I wasn't slacking or working slow, so I started to wonder why. One day, I saw Gino coming out of the warehouse manager's office area. It was just a desk between two partitions, acting strange when he noticed I saw him. We were given our stacks of orders for the day, and I noticed that mine was double the size of Gino's. I figured out he must have been putting his orders in my stack before the manager gave them out but had no proof. The next day, I got there early and climbed up on one of the storage racks. You know, the kind you see at Home Depot, above the desk where I couldn't be seen. The manager was inside the office getting coffee when I saw Gino go to his desk and slip half of his orders into my pile. I waited until he left and went inside to tell the manager. He came out and counted the orders and noticed I had many more than I should have, and Gino's were half of what he gave him. When we all got together to get our orders later, all of them had a few extra in them, and Gino was gone. He got fired for what he did, but to make matters worse, he told Victor that he was coming back to kill me for reporting him, and Victor advised I leave because he knew he was serious, and that Gino wanted to have something like a killing on his reputation for getting into a gang. I was furious at the manager for telling him I reported him, so I quit on the spot, but not before going inside to tell my mom what happened. She was good friends with the owner and told him about the incident, and he was so sorry it happened, and he promptly walked out into the warehouse and fired the manager for putting my life in danger by not being more discreet about who reported Gino. I heard later he threw me under the bus because he was afraid of Gino himself. Fast forward a few months, and I had a better job working at a well-known amusement park. One night, the local Los Angeles channel had a special on gang violence that I watched. One segment was about an armed robbery in which two gang members robbed a convenience store, and the store video had the two gang members' faces clearly on the screen, and there was sound also. They not only robbed the store, but the one gang member shot and killed the clerk for no reason. Guess who that gang member was? Gino. I recognized him by his face, tattoos, and voice. At the end, they said it was still unsolved and to call the LA County Sheriffs if there was any information. I called immediately, and 2 detectives came by the next morning. A few weeks later, the detective called me to thank me because they not only arrested him but got the other guy too. Dumb Gino even had the murder weapon on him when arrested. They contacted me a few months later to inform me that Gino and his friend both got life without parole.